time. Time has made us what we are. 700 years of it. Time to take stock, to look back. John de Clinton was sent by King Edward I to sort out the Scots. He earned a barony for his efforts, and his descendants picked Devon for their future. The dynasty settled, married like-minded landowners, served kings and country in war and peace, and even chased Barbary pirates. Brick by brick we left our mark, builders of homes and churches, benefactors of hospitals and schools, putting money into innovation, everything from railways, canals to running water. All the while, season on season, year upon year, farming the rich Devon soil and planting thousands of acres of fruitful forest. Clinton Devon Estates remains a family business, now under the watchful eyes of the 22nd and 23rd generations, with a loyal board of trustees and a team of 65 specialists to keep legacy alive and discover new growth. Producing food, organic milk, and timber sustainably. Protecting the environment in one of Europe's most important conservation sites. Providing homes and jobs for families and businesses. Investing in fresh ideas for energy, productivity, and above all, for people. Our inspiration is our history. Our dedication is our land. Our aspiration is to do things better, to uphold tradition, but ever improve this precious part of England. It is what we've always done and always will, doing our part for our part of the world.
So good afternoon. I'm delighted to be invited, I think. I am, obviously, to speak at this conference and to give a perspective of how a large estate on a working countryside is managed. And I emphasise it's a working countryside from our perspective, but also how we might reverse some of the alarming declines in bird species, such as the lapwing already highlighted this morning. We were delighted to sponsor the production of some of the content in the Bird Atlas, specifically the Dartford Warbler. We also sponsored the Dartford Warbler in the BTO's Atlas a year or so ago. It will escape nobody here today that we live in a contested landscape, where society's requirement for the production of food, timber, housing, transport, energy, recreational space and wildlife all jostle for position. As a large estate, our business activities encompass all these areas. The challenge society has, which we also have as a business, and which I relish as a state director, is how to reconcile these varying and apparently conflicting needs. I think with the right approach, support and partnerships in place, it's possible to do that, and I fervently believe that private estates, such as ours, have great potential to deliver public benefit and desperately needed space for nature across a landscape scale, which was highlighted, as has been mentioned earlier, in the government's 2011 Environment White Paper. I'll begin this talk with an overview of the estate and its strategy, and then look at some of the initiatives and ways of working we have in place, and some we're still in the process of developing, to ensure that our business and our industry can step up to the mark and play its part in reversing the erosion of our country's natural capital, birds included. I will touch on a range of issues, including where the balance should lie between business responsibility, regulation, and stewardship incentives. So here you can see the complexity of what we do at Clinton Devon Estates. Apologies if it's got a lot to take in, it's already changed since we did it in 2014 with one another Queen's Wharf Enterprise. I just throw that one in, and Kevin mentioned about about my shy retiring time. And there's a few other things going on. We've got another 2 megawatts of solar park on grade 3B agricultural land. You might wish to comment about later. But that's an overview of what we're managing. I don't wish to dwell on any length on the underlying frameworks that guide our business operations. Suffice to say that we have a strategy. And what's written in the strategy is very important, as it outlines our core business principles and the degree to which we value and, importantly, report against and monitor the attainment of goals related to financial, natural and human capital. It's a guide to how we prioritise what we do and how we do it. Everything starts with our strategy, and every responsible business should have one. This is where our endeavours to protect wildlife have to start. You will see that responsible stewardship is one of our key principles, the golden thread, and each of our business areas must balance its decisions against this principle. Internally, on a day-to-day basis, we ask the question and challenge ourselves on this. Are we being good stewards? Are we acting responsibly? So what does this mean in practice? What are we doing specifically to ensure our activities enrich wildlife and erode it? And what are the challenges for other similar rural businesses? This is a picture of Bicton Common. And the starting point for us and other similar land-owning organisations has to be to know what and where the important natural assets are that we need to protect and enhance, the legislation that protects them and the management that they require. This common forms part of the East Devon Polar Heath, which is one of our key conservation sites of European significance, rich in wildlife with a high percentage of species with various conservation designations, more conservation designations than you'd ever wish to have if you want to build a golf course. Professional management of this site is required. We trade on our reputation, and sound wildlife management is simply good business. And the long-term sustainability of our enterprise depends upon demonstrating to the public, communities, and to government agencies that protection and enhancement of the environment is central to all we do. To ensure the management of the countryside is evidence-based and professional, in 2011 the estate created a new senior management position of Nature Conservation Manager, with this post having parity with other senior posts of our primary departments. Dr. Sam Bridgewater is an ecologist and is sadly not here today. And few estates have this role, I appreciate, and I sincerely hope that in the future many more will recognise the need for them. This is one of the many improvements I'd like to see across our industry. Estates and land management businesses cannot afford to do this. Where the creation of such a post is not possible, then partnerships to provide professional advice are required, I believe. Already Dr. Bridgewater has completed a comprehensive audit of over 3,000 species of wildlife to be found on Polar Heaths. And the findings of these are already informing and improving our management and demonstrated the importance, in a particular case, of mosaic management across the heaths. He's now focusing his attention, as I asked him to, across the whole estate, 25,000 acres, including all our other sites of conservation significance. In addition, we have the Beer Quarry Special Protection Area, for bats, Becksteins and horseshoe bats, the Otter Estuary SSSI, 250 hectares of woodland with SSSI designation, one of the ancient woodland, 400 hectares of county wildlife sites, and over 1,000 kilometres of hedgerows. This work is extremely exciting for us, because if we understand what we have, we can better understand where the weaknesses in our landscape lie and how we can strengthen them. Where are the best areas to plant new woodlands or hedgerows to provide wildlife corridors? Where would the creation of new ponds or species-rich grasslands be valuable? What areas of low agricultural value might better be taken out of production and given over to wildlife? A modest contribution to Mr. Bombier's rewilding, perhaps. Ultimately, we want to develop ways of working that could perhaps be adopted by other rural businesses like ours. We need to develop a model where estates such as Clinton Devon are considered as wildlife reserves. Of course, we have to back this up with our management and approach. One thing we've been developing of late are new metrics. Somebody in the office tell me what came out. and frameworks to enable us to critically analyse the consequences of our business decisions on the environment and society, whether this be introducing conservation grazing to a new area of heathland, expanding our dairy, or building 350 new homes. By way of an example, we have one farm, Stantaway, of about 100 hectares. It lies immediately to the east of the Otter Estuary. Historically, this has been tenanted, but came back to us last year when the tenant retired. When this came back, we were faced with various options as to what to do and how to farm it. Our decision was influenced by a number of factors, with the need to demonstrate a financial return amongst them. But our decision was also influenced by our knowledge of the environment, including the presence of breeding seal buntings. And thanks are due to our volunteer Otter Estuary warden, Doug Cummins, just sitting in front of me here to look after me if it all gets a bit hairy at question time. And also the RSPB, who were monitoring their presence. As most of you are aware, seal buntings have a highly restricted distribution to Devon and Cornwall, with hedgerows for nesting, rough grassland to provide supply of insects for summer food, and overwintering stubble for winter food. Their plight is related to farming practices. This slide, a bit complicated, I apologise, shows what was considered during our decision-making process. And this is true. This wasn't done for this conference. It was done for our management team a few months ago. If we wanted to make just a low-risk, fast return, we could have rented out the farm for maize. And we were asked if we would, to feed a range of anaerobic digesters springing up all over East Devon. But this would have come with environmental and reputational cost. Such a decision would not, for example, have supported the existing seal bunting population, and the planting of maize comes with risks related to soil loss runoff, for example. In the end, we decided on organic conversion and a 5-year rotation, including grass clover, spring oats, spring barley and winter wheat. Not only would this decision support our other business activities, e.g. our existing organic dairy, but also the seal buntings. It's hard to put exact figures on such things, but in this case, the cost of going for a more environmentally friendly approach in terms of considering solely income forgone was about £25,000 a year. Conservation has a cost, but looking holistically, we believe our decision was good business in the longer term. But I do recognise that due to our size, we are robust enough, perhaps, to be able to make these wiser long-term decisions. We're now hopeful that we can also attract additional countryside stewardship funding to this site for further environmental gains, including the planting of 4 kilometres of hedgerow. It would still entail a cost to us, but that might in part be grant supported. This raises an interesting question I would be happy to debate later on how one finds the right balance between regulation, business responsibility and stewardship. In this case, I think we found the right balance and came up with the right decision for our business that takes into account financial, social and environmental factors, the wider needs of the community and also the taxpayer who will support some of these improvements. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Deborah Devini, formerly of the RSPB and now the Devon Wildlife Trust, for supporting us during this process. This brings me neatly on to partnerships. If we're going to deliver landscape scale initiatives, landowners can't do this in isolation. Our conservation team is larger than most, but it's still small, and the development of strong delivery partnerships is key. Great recent examples we're involved in include the River Otter Beaver Trial and the Devon Greater Horseshoe Project, both of which are led by Devon Wildlife Trust. Both have a strong underlying delivery partnership in place, and these include landowners. The relationship between landowners and wildlife interests, sadly, has historically been an uncomfortable one, frequently defined by mutual suspicion and mistrust. Thankfully for the better, and projects such as the Devon Beaver Trial, things are changing. The Greater Horseshoe Bat Project is testament to this. If we are to provide landscape-scale conservation for all species, our industries need to respect one another more than they currently do and work together. The development and delivery of nature improvement areas is a further testament to how we're starting to think big, although Kevin's right, they've run out of money, and deliver as a partnership across the landscape, providing transparency to the public about how the countryside works. To deliver landscape-scale conservation, because of the areas they manage, farmers must be the solution and not the problem. I received with interest recently a copy of the recently published Response for Nature report It sets out some of the key actions the government must include as part of its 25-year biodiversity plan. I look forward to the day when landowning owners and those of the NFU and the CLA are on those documents, in addition to those of the Wildlife Trust's National Trust and Wildlife Interests. Fanciful perhaps, but we must aspire to this if we want transformational change, and I'll talk later of ambition. Here are some of the images of beaver-engineered landscapes in Bavaria, taken by our nature conservation manager during a fact-finding trip on beaver management. He didn't expect to be sent to Bavaria by me when he joined in 2011. The transformation of the landscape in certain areas of Bavaria has been amazing, with superb wildlife gains for invertebrates, fish and birds. It's amazing to think that we might have enhanced the landscapes here. The question which has to be yet answered is as a country, are we ready for it? Does government recognise the importance of enabling intrusive management that will be necessary, perhaps even culling beavers? Will the public be supportive of management? Will we be able to negotiate the land where these kind of transformations take place? I'll leave that one hanging for later. Partnerships for us need to be internal as well as external. Businesses such as ours with broad interests cannot afford to operate as a series of silo working departments, and the challenge I have as director is to ensure this is not the case. What one arm of my business does has implications for the other. I've already provided one example of how our wildlife and farming departments interact by way of our land use decisions at Stantaway Farm. Here is another, nightjars, shot up by the Spanish as they fly over the Clinton Devon estates where we look after them. They're one of our key conservation species on the estate, and numbers associated with the eastern Pelvides, for example, have maintained broadly constant at about 80 pairs since the time they were designated in the 90s. This species is a migrant and likes to nest in heathland, and also felled or recently restocked forestry plantations. This slide shows the distribution of nightjars in 2015. Please note we only took a partial survey, which is why certain common areas in the middle of the graphic show an absence. This is not actually the case. Here, though, is a restocking plan from our forestry department for our woodland around these for the period from 2011 to 2016. Yes, to a forester, it's a restocking plan related to a long-term forestry plan. It is, however, also a nightjar habitat renewal plan to a conservation manager. And as a business, we need to be clever about seeing and capitalising on these interactions. So where are we with existing conservation sites in Devon? This data is taken from the State of Nature report compiled by the Local Nature Partnership in 2013. And according to this, approximately 30% of Devon has some kind of status. And on the face of it, our SSSIs are improving in condition, although our county wildlife sites suffer from poor or under-management. More needs to be done. There's been some interesting debate over the past few years about land sparing, where some land is farmed intensively and some land is left completely alone for conservation, and land sharing, where all land is farmed but using wildlife-friendly techniques. My view on this matter is not surprisingly that we need both. If we can improve our management and resourcing of our existing wildlife reserves, from Dartmoor to the smallest non-statutory county wildlife site, then we've already have a good foundation. One of the key findings of the influential Lawson Review is that management of our existing conservation sites needs to improve, and I think this is still the case. As an organisation, we are certainly scrutinising what we do on our own reserves so we can get better at it. The reality, though, is that in our crowded landscape and the various demands made upon it, it will be hard to create more nature reserves. Thus, land sharing has a place, and it's here that intelligent, insightful and joined-up farming is required across the landscape, which is what we're trying to do on the estate. To identify where our best gains can be made and to plan these into our operations. Although environmental improvements on farms must start with personal responsibility, I believe that stewardship support for agri-environment schemes, such as the latest incarnation of the Countryside Stewardship Scheme, are still required. I think it's generally accepted that agri-environment schemes have been successful as a policy mechanism to some degree, but this depends on them being suitably financed, targeted, monitored and regulated. Are stewardship grants reasonable? Back to the East Devon Heaths again. This area is common land, an important recreation area for East Devon, with an estimated 1.9 million visits a year, nearly as many as the National Park. It's currently free at the point of use. Management of the 1,000+ hectare site is currently supported by a 10-year higher level stewardship scheme finishing in 2011. With natural ones here. We need to sort that out in the next few weeks, please. Which largely supports, although not completely, the cost of maintaining it for access and wildlife. Management of Heathland is to some degree fighting against nature to deliver the wide benefits of and the annual cost of it is indefinite. It's also large and costs hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. Considering the many ecosystems it provides, I think it's great value for money. I would certainly argue that it's entirely reasonable for grant support to assist in the management of an area which provides so many benefits to society. If one demonstrates that management brings about the best wildlife gains and we can demonstrate it's professionally run and robustly monitored, it's not hard to imagine what would happen to the site such grant support would be withdrawn. This is not grant support for the landowner, it's rewarding him or her for having the land and doing nothing. These funds are used to support the salaries of the team, the equipment and the infrastructure we use to manage the site. There is also certainty that there's a need for regulation. For example, there's a water quality challenge in East Devon, which of course impacts on wildlife. Much of it related to manure and slurry and manure entering the river especially. These three pictures, for example, have been taken from a series of fact sheets related to the management of maize produced under the auspices of the East Devon Catchment Partnership, of which we're a part. I think it's true to say there's still a great deal of work that needs to be done to clean up farming practices. Of course, guidance and advice plays a role, but so must also regulation. Other businesses would have been fined out of existence if they polluted rivers to the same degree that farming across the landscape is doing. With this in mind, I've often wondered whether there's potential to further professionalise the farming industry. Could there be a scope for developing chartered farmers, perhaps, recognising professionals who use their knowledge, experience and influence to promote win-win scenarios for agriculture, production and also wildlife? Other organisations have managed the same. We have chartered accountants, chartered ecologists and chartered foresters. So whilst on the subject of farming, I'd like to return briefly to the subject of business responsibility. We have a large organic dairy herd comprising 1,200 cows, heifers and young stock in the Otter catchment. The presence of this herd is of course potentially polluting. We cannot afford to do this as a business. To ensure that we don't pollute, we've recently invested over £1 million in upgrading our dairy facilities and a further £100,000 in the construction of this 20,000 cubic metre slurry lagoon to ensure that the risk of diffuse pollution into the River Otter from slurry is minimised. This lagoon also enables us to meet our statutory requirements for farming in a nitrogen sensitive zone. We can store the fertiliser, make sure it's used when needed and it doesn't get washed off when it won't be taken up by the plants. This was a big investment for us and the payback period would be at least 10 years. We cannot afford not to do this. We've also many wildcard problems impacting on wildlife related to invasive species such as Himalayan balsam. Also climate change and also diseases such as Phytophthora and cholera. Tackling these issues requires strong government, an evidence-based control strategy and clear and ambiguous long-term policies. This has not always been the case. We have an estate strategy for the control of Himalayan balsam, for example, which focuses on eradicating outlying populations, driving it down from the tributaries of the Otter before tackling the floodplain. But as an example, I'd like to focus on something else. The grey squirrel, that much-loved mammal of the British public. Indeed, for many, it will be the only wild mammal they'll ever see, and a cute animal it will be harder to imagine. Across the estate, we have 17% of woodland cover. Woodland cover across Devon is 11%, across the country is 9%. 25% of our woodlands are broadland. The remainder are FSC certified mixed coniferous production. Woodland for which we make no apologies, as the country needs sustainable source of timber. Do we value broadleaf woodlands and recognise them as our right value? Yes, of course we do. Would we like to plant more? Yes. But the sad fact is that our current estate policy is not to do so. As 15 years or so after planting broadleaf saplings, they are annihilated by squirrels, which strip the bark. When we think of the Devon landscape, we think of hedgerows and broadleaf woodlands and ancient trees in our fields. It's a sad reality that these are not being replaced. 200 years from now, our landscape will look very different. For tackling this particular issue, personal and business responsibility is not enough. If we manage squirrel populations, which we are endeavouring but failing to do, numbers flood in from adjacent areas, and before long we are back to where we started. If we want broadleaf woodlands in the future, we need strong leadership from government, evidence-based interventions that would necessarily include some degree of culling, and culling is an emotive term. The British public are highly supportive of our wildlife, but less supportive of its management, even of highly destructive invasive species. And how can we change this? Finally, I'd like to say that whatever we do to enhance our wildlife, we need big ambition. As the director of an estate with a 700-year history, I'm mindful of the great ambition that Lord Clinton's ancestors and my predecessors in running the estate showed. The forests they planted, the schools and hospitals and churches and houses they built. Maybe indeed they got it right. Who knows? I'd like to think that today the estate could show similar ambition and lead the way in tackling some of our environmental issues. This does require long-term thinking, and long-term thinking is something we're good at on estates. Planning is not done in 5-year political cycles. We measure time in generational intervals, and one example of this kind of ambition we have is the Lower Otter Restoration Project. Many of you will know this site. It is a beautiful 30-hectare salt marsh, reed bed SSSI, for which 120 bird species have been recorded, including numerous waders. And again, I'd like to take this opportunity at this point to thank our volunteer warden Doug, who's sitting here looking after me, who looks after the site, has monitored the bird life, and has advised on improving the habitat of adjacent grazing marshland through the digging of scrapes supported by HLS. The river, though, is now disconnected from its floodplain due, amongst other things, to an embankment that since 1811 has run up its middle and is in a heavily altered state. It's our own Somerset levels. With climate change bringing sea level rise and increased incidence of severe rainfall, the embankment is now beginning to fail. We are currently investigating the potential for a managed realignment scheme that accepts this reality. This vision involves breaching the existing embankments and bridging these to secure public access, creating over 70 additional hectares of intertidal and associated wet habitat. In doing so, we hope to produce a more natural and wildlife-enhanced site that is more resilient to climate change. Delivering a scheme of this scale is problematic, but this is the kind of ambition we need and elsewhere. So to conclude, I've covered a broad range of topics in this talk. What are the central themes? I believe there are responsibility of businesses to do the right thing and make decisions based on social, environmental and financial factors. Also to be more professional and have more professional land-based industries, chartered farmers perhaps. Better understanding of the weaknesses in our landscape and ambitious landscape planning for wildlife. Stronger partnerships between land-owning organisations and wildlife interests. Improved management of existing priority wildlife sites and robust evidence-based monitoring. Private, public and third sector industries working together. Strong government and coherent long-term policies. Targeted and targeted agri-environment schemes and ambition. And for me, ambition is our stewardship over the next 700 years. Thank you very much.